Welcome everyone to the SVGN 2023 Tecmo Halfway Roundup. I'm your host Joe, and some of you might be wondering what exactly this is. Well, the idea is basically that since we haven't really given you an idea of how everyone is doing, we here at SVGN figured the best way would be to take a look at each of the individual standings that each team currently has and see just how good each of them are doing. Not just their standings, but their overall stats, as well as taking a look at who are the individual leaders coming in with this halfway point of the season for the 2023 Tecmo season. Just to give you an idea of how everyone is doing. See which teams are more likely to sneak into the playoffs than others, given how the first half of the season has gone compared to the second half of the season. So, with that said, we're going to jump right into it and start by taking a look at our NFL standings, which will also give us a look at the points for and points against for each team. Just as a reminder for where each team stands in terms of how they look in the division. We'll start, of course, in the AFC East, where the Bills currently have the lead in the division at 7-1, followed behind by the Jets at 4-3, the Patriots at 4-4, and the Miami Dolphins at 3-5. Moving on to the AFC North, the Browns are at 6-1 in the lead. The Bengals and Steelers are tied for second place at 5-2 each, and the Ravens are currently at 3-5. In the AFC South, it's the Titans at 4-3, the Texans at 3-4, Jaguars in third at 2-5, and the Colts at the bottom at 2-6. And on to the AFC West, we have the Chiefs at 6-2, the Chargers at 4-3, the Raiders at 3-5, and the Broncos in fourth at 2-5. Meanwhile, in the NFC, in the East, you have the Cowboys in the lead at 6-1, the Commanders in second place at 4-4, the Eagles in third place at 3-5, and all the way down at the bottom are the New York Giants at 0-8. In the South, there is a tie for first place as both the Lions and Packers are at 6-1. The Vikings are in third place at 4-4, and the Bears are in fourth at 2-6. Down in the NFC South, the Panthers are currently in the possession of the NFC South crown at 6-1, followed up by the Falcons at 5-3. The Buccaneers are in third at 2-5, and bringing up the rear are the Saints at 2-6. And finally, in the NFC West, the 49ers have quite a lead for the division at 5-2, followed up by the Seahawks at 3-4, the Rams at 2-6, and the Cardinals at 1-7. So, since the Tecmo NFL playoffs are 6 seeds instead of 7 like they have been for the past couple of years, that means that this is how the playoff picture looks as of right now. The Bills and Browns would have the first round byes. The Chiefs would be hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Titans would be hosting the Cincinnati Bengals for the AFC, and in the NFC, the Cowboys and Panthers would have bye weeks, while the Lions would be hosting the Falcons, and the 49ers would be hosting the Packers. The top 5 teams in the NFL for number of points scored are the Eagles at 352, the Bills at 350, the Raiders at 347, the Browns at 332, and the Chiefs at 329. Meanwhile, the bottom 5 from 5th worst to worst are the Colts at 221, the Buccaneers at 208, the Cardinals at 205, the Texans at 192, and the Giants at 171. Meanwhile, looking at the number of points allowed in terms of the least number of points allowed, the Panthers currently lead the league at 196, followed by the Cowboys at 207, the Browns at 209, the Packers at 213, and the Texans at 215. Meanwhile, going from 5th worst to worst, the Raiders are at 316, the Colts at 328, the Bears at 344, the Cardinals at 386, and the most number of points allowed in the league belongs to the Giants at 432. In terms of point differential, the teams that are doing the best, the Browns have the greatest point differential at 123, the Lions at 109, the Bills at 106, the Packers at 96, and the Panthers at 83. Meanwhile, 5th worst to worst, the Buccaneers have allowed their opponents to score 92 more points than they have scored, the Colts at 107, the Bears at 116, the Cardinals at 181, and the Giants at 261. Now, as far as total offensive and defensive yardage, that's where things get interesting. Chiefs have the most offensive yardage in the league at 3,981, followed by the Eagles at 3,960, the Raiders at 3,855, and the Browns at 3,650, and the Bears at 3,619. In terms of the bottom of the group, the Buccaneers at 2,890, the Titans at 2,877, the Colts at 2,860, the Jets at 2,762, and the Texans at 2,725. In terms of passing yardage, the Chiefs still lead the league in terms of passing offense at 3,115. The Saints are behind them at 2,748, the Vikings at 2,736, the Commanders at 2,714, and the Eagles at 2,675. Meanwhile, in the bottom five, it is the Ravens at 1,816, the Giants at 1,752, the Texans at 1,709, the Patriots at 1,684, and the Falcons at 1,577. And in terms of rushing yardage, the top five teams, while the Falcons are the worst at passing offense, they have the best rushing offense at 1,608, followed by the Bears at 1,591, the Ravens at 1,422, the Patriots at 1,340, and the 49ers at 1,304. Meanwhile, in the bottom five, you have the Broncos at 702, the Seahawks at 649, the Panthers at 643, the Cardinals at 583, and the Chargers at 572. Looking now at defense in terms of total yardage allowed, the Texans actually lead the league at 2,589, followed by the Jaguars at 2,791, the Panthers at 2,820, the Titans at 2,867, and the Jets at 2,874 to round out the top five. In terms of the bottom five, the Bears are in fifth at 3632, the Chiefs at 3663, the Vikings at 3689, the Colts at 3829, and the Raiders have given up the most yardage on defense at 3,906. In terms of passing defenses, the Texans have the greatest passing defense as well, having only given up 1,511 passing yards. The Titans are in second place at 1,739, the Jaguars at 1,778, the Packers at 1,857, and the Steelers are the first team to allow over 2,000 passing yards on this list at 2,012. Meanwhile, in the bottom five, the 49ers have given up the fifth most at 2,555, followed by the Bills at 2,607, the Raiders at 2,698, the Colts at 2,902, and the Chiefs have given up the most so far this season at 2,960. Moving on to rushing defense, the Jets have the best rushing defense in the league, only allowing 668 rushing yards, followed by the Panthers at 676, the Chiefs at 703, somehow having a lot less rushing yards than they have passing yards, the 49ers at 730, and the Bills at 750. Meanwhile, in the bottom five, the Bears have given up the fifth most at 1,170 rushing yards, followed by the Raiders at 1,208, the Packers at 1,216, the Cardinals only 1 yard ahead of them at 1,217, and the Vikings at 1,403 rushing yards given up this season. Now on to the individual accolades of different players in the NFL. We're going to look at the different stats. We're going to start with the leader in passer rating, and that leader is Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles with a passer rating of 134.6. In terms of passing completion, the leader is Patrick Mahomes, currently has a completion of 37.6%. Going into number of attempts, the leader is actually Josh Dobbs at 226 attempts. But in terms of completions, it is Patrick Mahomes who currently takes that stat. In terms of yardage, Patrick Mahomes leads that as well at 2,938 passing yards. I almost said 33. I apologize. And in terms of yards per attempt, it's actually Jalen Hurts again who leads at 23 yards per attempt. Jimmy Garoppolo of the Las Vegas Raiders has thrown the most touchdowns at 34, and Brock Purdy is the only NFL QB to not have thrown any interceptions, period. He has an interception percentage of 0. Even Dak Prescott, who is in second place, has an interception percentage of 1.4%. On to receiving, where Kadarius Toney has the most number of receptions at 51, leading the league in that regard. However, he's also the leader in receiving yards at 1,843. But it's actually Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles who leads in yards per reception at 53 yards for every single catch that he makes. And in terms of receiving touchdowns, it is Devontae Adams and Kadarius Toney in a tie for first place, as they have the lead at 18 apiece. For rushing leaders, it's actually rookie Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons who leads the league at 1,266 yards. Brian Robinson, however, of the Washington Commanders, has been given the ball the most of anybody with rushing yards at 147. And believe it or not, it is Deshaun Watson of the Cleveland Browns, the quarterback, who actually has the most yards per rushing attempt at 14.6. And in terms of rushing touchdowns, it's actually Watson's teammate Nick Chubb, who currently leads the league at 20 touchdowns. In terms of overall points, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers leads the league with 126 points scored just from him alone. In terms of number of touchdowns, he is the one responsible for that, with 21 touchdowns just to him. Daniel Carlson currently leads the league in terms of extra points made at 47 extra points. But in terms of field goals, it's Nick Folk of the Tennessee Titans and Greg Zuerlein of the New York Jets, who are currently tied for the lead at 14 field goals made apiece. Now on to a stat that most people don't really care about, punting. Tress Way actually leads the league in terms of average punting yards at 58.1 yards per punt. However, in terms of number of punts, that belongs to Nolan Cooney of the Arizona Cardinals, who has punted the ball 25 times this season. Now on to the defensive stats, starting with interceptions. Budda Baker, Xavier Woods, and Kirby Joseph all have 6 interceptions to their name. They are leading the league in terms of number of interceptions made. Budda Baker, though, is the lone leader in terms of interception yards, returning the ball 149 yards back the other way for the Arizona Cardinals. However, it's Sauce Gardner who currently has the most number of pick sixes. He has 3 of them and is the only person in the league to have more than 1 pick six. In terms of sacking leaders, it's Ed Oliver of the Buffalo Bills who reigns supreme at 15 sacks just from him alone. As far as punt returns are concerned, Ray McCloud actually has the best punting average of 15.4 yards per punt return. Calvin Austin III, however, is the leader in terms of overall punting yardage for returns at 227 yards. In terms of number of punt returns, Raheem Blackshear is actually the one who's made the most number of punt returns at 18. And of course, nobody has made a punt return for a touchdown. Onward to kick returns. Just like punt returns, nobody in the league has had a kick return for a touchdown. However, Emmanuel Wilson of the Green Bay Packers, who's not even the starting kick returner, currently has the best kick return average, averaging 28.2 yards per kick. Gary Brightwell of the New York Giants, however, the lone bright spot for the Giants season, as he has returned kickoffs the most number of yards, more than anyone else in the league, at 1,212. He also leads the league in number of kick returns. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but he has made 71 kick returns so far this season. And that's going to do it for our halfway roundup here for the 2023 Tecmo NFL season. A reminder to join us tomorrow for our Week 10 Game of the Week between the Houston Texans and the Cincinnati Bengals, as well as joining us later on in the week for our Tecmo Rewind for Week 10. And don't forget, next Sunday, we will have our Week 11 Game of the Week, a Super Bowl 57 rematch between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. For all of us here at SVGN, the Sports Video Game Network, I'm your host, Joe, saying good night, everybody!